Welcome to the deep dive. This is the one tailored just for you, where we're digging into your stack of sources,
Oh.
research, notes, all focused today on, well, the really fascinating topic of longevity and aging.
Yeah, and looking through the sources you pulled together, it really shows how much this field is. Well, it's buzzing right now, isn't it? It's definitely
Yes.
not
I
static.
know, not at all.
It feels like a constant shift of scientific research, opinion,
Yeah.
um, what we thought we knew about aging, and maybe more importantly, how we might actually influence it. Well, that's kind of being rewritten as we speak.
Exactly. So, our mission here in this deep dive is to go through these sources together, try and pull out those really important nuggets of knowledge, those key insights,
Now,
and give you a clearer picture of what the science is saying, about maybe slowing down or even reversing some aspects of aging. Let's unpack this.
okay, so to start, the sources talk a lot about the fundamental changes, the stuff happening right down at the cellular level as we age. Scientists, they call these the hallmarks of aging. Think of them as the sort of core processes that start to go a bit awry.
Okay, so not just, getting wrinkles or gray hair, but what's actually happening inside the cells.
Precisely. Yeah. A few key ones that pop up in your sources. Um, Things like the cell's ability to sense and adjust to nutrient levels, that gets diminished. They get less efficient at managing energy.
Okay.
You also see impaired mitochondrial functioning. The mitochondria, they're the energy powerhouses of the cell.
Right, like the power grid getting old.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
And when they falter, pretty much everything slows down. And then the other really big one is cellular senescence.
Ah, yes, senescence. That's when cells stop dividing.
Right.
Right. Which sounds maybe okay, but they don't just die off nicely.
No, exactly. They just hang around like these zombie cells. That's the term used.
Zombie cells.
And these zombie cells, they're actually quite damaging. They secrete all these inflammatory signals that negatively affect their healthy neighbors.
Mm.
It's not a quiet retirement, let's
Yeah.
put it that way.
Mm,
It's pretty disruptive.
that makes a lot of sense. So they're actively causing problems. And connecting to these cellular changes, one perspective that was highlighted is David Sinclair's information theory of aging.
Hmm.
The idea there, as I understand it, is that aging is like a loss or corruption of the cell's original information, its genetic instructions, specifically mentioning things like DNA methylation patterns changing.
Yeah, it's like the operating system getting scrambled over time. It's a really powerful framework, for understanding why things start to go wrong systemically.
Right.
And these hallmarks, these theories, they lead researchers to focus on certain key biological pathways. Your sources point to three main ones involved in longevity: sirtuins, MTOR, and AMPK.
Sirtuins, MTOR, AMPK. Okay. And the general idea here, based on these sources, is you want to kind of tweak these pathways, boost sirtuins and AMPK, but maybe slow down MTOR?
That's the general principle, yeah.
Yep.
Upregulating sirtuins and AMPK, downregulating MTOR. Doing this seems to provide health benefits that kind of mirror a younger cellular state and potentially could slow down aspects of aging.
It's about maintaining that balance, that
Yeah.
that cellular state, more like when we were younger.
Exactly. Keeping that delicate balance.
Okay, so we've got the targets, sirtuins, MTOR, AMPK. How do we actually, influence these pathways? What do the sources say about that?
Well, the strategies discussed are pretty intuitive in some ways, but the sources do get into the specifics. Exercise is a big one. No huge surprise there.
Right.
High-intensity interval training, HIIT, that gets specifically called out for boosting AMPK activity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Intense exercise forces cells to work harder, become more efficient, right?
Exactly. And calorie restriction strategies are also really prominent. We hear a lot about intermittent fasting, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but also more structured approaches like programs designed to mimic fasting. Prolon is mentioned, for instance.
Okay, fasting mimicking diets.
Right. These periods of, let's call it caloric stress or perceived scarcity, they act as signals to the body. They activate those beneficial pathways, shutting down the growth-focused MTR and ramping up the repair and efficiency pathways, the sirtuins and AMPK.
Got it. And the sources also list quite a few specific supplements noted for helping here, particularly for boosting AMPK.
They do, yeah. Things like metformin come up, berberine, quercetin, alpha-lipoic acid, and resveratrol are mentioned as ways to potentially boost AMPK activity.
Okay.
But what's particularly interesting here, and it's kind of a recurring theme across these sources,
Okay.
is that these core strategies, regular exercise, going hungry sometimes through calorie restriction or fasting, and maybe some targeted supplements, they don't just hit one pathway.
Ah, right.
They're presented as ways to optimize all three of those major longevity pathways. sort of simultaneously. It's more of a multi-target approach, which seems key.
That multi-target idea, that's really powerful. It suggests these aren't just isolated tricks, but maybe fundamental levers for cellular health.
Absolutely. And speaking of cellular health and energy,
Mm-hmm.
let's dive into mitochondria for a bit. Your sources describe them so vividly. The body's intracellular powerhouses. They produce the ATP energy that fuels literally everything we do. And get this, kind of mind-blowing. About a third of your entire body weight is mitochondrial mass.
Wow, a third. Really? That just underscores how crucial they are.
Yeah.
And we already said dysfunctional mitochondria are a big part of that aging picture.
They really are, leading to that loss of vitality. So the sources introduced this specific protocol from Dr. John Lawrence. It's called the Fast Track Fast.
Fast track fast, okay.
And it's presented as a way to potentially amplify some of the core benefits of a longer fast, specifically things like invigorating and renewing mitochondria, but maybe in a shorter time frame.
Interesting. So compressing the benefits, tell us about this protocol. It sounds like it layers different things together.
It does, yeah. It breaks down into 3 phases. Each phase has a specific goal, and specific supporting compounds are mentioned. Phase 1 is all about loading cellular NAD plus SED.
NAD plus SER, right, that comes up a lot in anti-aging.
It's absolutely essential, required for life itself and critically for processes linked to long life. The big issue is NAD plus levels decline significantly as we age.
So phase 1 is trying to basically top up the tank before the fast starts. The sources list ingredients like pure NAD plus itself, NR, NMN. Those are precursors, right?
Exactly. Precursors are forms of NAD plus, right? Plus there's a proprietary blend mentioned with other compounds like visitin, ginkgo biloba, EGCG, resveratrol, TMG, specific terpenes. Quite a list.
Okay. And the purpose.
The purpose is presented as 1, maximizing cellular energy beforehand, and 2, preparing the cellular machinery to properly signal processes like autophagy and mitophagy. That's the cell's self-cleaning and mitochondrial recycling.
Got it. Priming the pump for cleanup. And there was an interesting note about pulsing these NAD plus efforts, not just taking them all the time.
Yes, that's a key point mentioned. The potential concern raised is that constantly high NAD plus might inadvertently support the survival of those problematic senescent zombie cells we talked about earlier.
Ah, okay. So pulsing might allow for the subsequent clearing phase to be more effective.
That seems to be the rationale, which leads directly into phase 2, senescent clearing. This is where you target those zombie cells.
Okay, so phase 2 is actively trying to get rid of them. Fasting itself helps with this cleanup, autophagy, and all that.
It absolutely does. But the protocol suggests combining the fast with compounds known as senolytics.
Senolytics agents that target and help clear senescent cells.
Exactly. The sources mentioned a specific blend called lucitol for this phase. Again, a complex list of ingredients, but the core idea is a stack of polyphenols, visitin, pterostilbene, ginkgo, EGCG, quercetin, curcumin, resveratrol, plus probiotics, polysaccharides, terpenes, designed to support those senolytic and mitophagy effects.
Okay, focus on clearing the decks. Phase 2 and then phase 3 is about rebuilding.
Precisely. Phase 3 aims to stimulate stem cells' growth and repair. And interestingly, this phase involves activating the mTOR pathway, the very one we generally want to downregulate during the fast itself.
Right, so you suppress mTOR during the fast for cleanup, and then you intentionally stimulate it afterwards for growth and repair.
That's the idea presented. It's the refeeding or recovery phase. The sources mentioned including things like a probiotic blend, an SRT polysaccharide complex, organic palm oil, again in this phase.
Huh.
The goals mentioned are stimulating beneficial gut microbes, what they call microbiome swarming, and improving how stem cells survive during that crucial refeeding period.
Okay, and the claim is this whole 3-phase thing aims to get results similar to a longer, say, 5-day fast, but in just 2 or 3 days. And you could do it, what, weekly or pulse through the year?
That's the suggestion, yeah, using it maybe weekly or pulsed several times a year as a targeted kind of cellular reset.
That's a pretty intriguing, structured approach to leverage fasting.
Now, another molecule that gets, well, a surprising amount of attention in your sources, especially linked again to Dr. John Lawrence's work, is melatonin.
Melatonin, right. Most of us just think sleep hormone, the thing you take for jet lag. But these sources paint a much, much bigger picture.
They really do. Melatonin is presented not just as a sleep regulator, but as this primary protector against stress. Almost like an internal shield, like an electromagnetic field for your body's cells and systems.
Wow. Okay. And the common question always comes up, right? If you take melatonin supplements, does your body stop making its own?
Yes, and the source addresses this directly. It states that supplemental melatonin doesn't seem to have that negative feedback loop. It doesn't appear to suppress your body's own production in the way that supplementing with other hormones, like testosterone or thyroid hormone, might.
Okay, that's important. Which kind of opens the door to this concept of higher doses they talk about, super physiological dosing.
Exactly. They mention examples of self-experiments using up to 800 milligrams, which is vastly higher than typical sleep doses. The theory presented is that because melatonin receptors aren't just in the brain for sleep, they're found all throughout the body.
Hmm.
Well, larger doses might be needed to significantly impact these other widespread functions beyond just sleep regulation.
That makes sense. If it's working on systems all over, you might need more to reach those targets effectively. And one of those unexpected targets is the gut microbiome.
Absolutely fascinating part. Melatonin is involved in what's described as a swarming effect in the gut. Its concentration there can be, get this, 400 times higher than in the brain.
400 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is highlighted as being especially important for supporting the repopulation of beneficial gut bacteria after something like a fast, like an amino fast protocol we just discussed.
So it's not just helping you maybe sleep better after a fast, it's actively helping your gut recover and rebuild.
Precisely. And its role in the immune system, according to these sources, is really quite remarkable. It's said to increase the progenitor cells that develop into powerful natural killer cells,
Okay.
generally enhance immune function, and even inhibit those dangerous cytokine storms, those inflammatory overreactions. They even mention a Cleveland Clinic study suggesting a pretty significant decrease, like 52% in COVID likelihood associated with melatonin use.
Wow. Inhibiting cytokine storms and potentially reducing COVID risk. And supporting a stronger antibody response with vaccination is also mentioned.
Yes. Plus, another layer, it's presented as a chelating agent, meaning it can help bind to and remove heavy metals like mercury and lead from the body, helping to prevent toxicity.
So it's like a built-in detoxifier as well. Goodness. And there was even a mention of kind of hacking your circadian rhythm with high-dose melatonin at night and then morning sunlight exposure.
Yeah, the sources suggest that combination can be a really powerful way to reset and optimize the body's natural clock. And other reported benefits mentioned include things like improved skin and collagen health. It's truly presented as this multifaceted molecule with roles far, far beyond just sleep. It can also be combined, they note, with compounds like magnolia bark, hemp, linalool, and probiotics.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still on specific compounds. Another one highlighted in your sources is geranyl or GG. This comes up in relation to Dr. Barry Tan's research.
Right, GG. It's described as this really essential building block in the body, crucial for healthy function, but, and here's the kicker, it's something that unfortunately starts to decline significantly from around age 30 onwards.
So something we really need, but we start losing it fairly early on. What does it actually do? What's its role?
Well, it's presented as critical for protein synthesis and also for the production of several really vital molecules. Think testosterone, progesterone, CoQ10,
CoQ10.
and MK4, which is a key form of vitamin K. There's even a potential link mentioned to helping manage age-related muscle loss, sarcopenia.
Okay, so it's like a foundational component for making other essential things work properly. And the sources mention it's extracted from the annatto plant.
Yes, from annatto. And it's important to note, as the sources really clarify, that while it's a precursor to tocotrienols and also CoQ10, it is distinctly not vitamin E. That seems to be a common point of confusion.
Got it. Not vitamin E. And because it's a precursor, if you don't have enough GG, then the things downstream, like making CoQ10, they suffer, right?
Exactly. And this is where the connection to common medications comes in. Statin drugs, used for lowering cholesterol, they are noted in the sources as depleting GG,
Ah.
which then logically impacts CoQ10 production. It explains why CoQ10 supplements are often recommended alongside statins.
Right, that link is often discussed.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned MK4 vitamin K, so that connects GG to bone health as well.
It does, yeah. And for anyone wondering about getting it from food, the sources point towards foods containing GG precursors or related compounds. Things like organ meat and dark meat are good for CoQ10. Ethnic foods like curry, seafood. The annatto plant itself, they note, is famously used in Filipino cuisine.
Interesting how these traditional foods might tie back to these specific compounds. And finally, are there specific products mentioned?
Yes, specific products that combine GG and CoQ10, like one called CoQnol, or supplements high in CoQ10 like Stemzen, are presented as ways to supplement these if needed.
Okay. Now let's move to what the sources present as a really major paradigm shift in how we understand health. the role of the gut microbiome, often called the body's internal firewall.
Yeah, this is huge. This isn't just about digestion anymore, is it? The sources really emphasize this idea that our health isn't dictated primarily by our human cells.
Right. That's the radical idea.
Human health, fundamentally, according to this view, stems from the biodiversity and the health of the microbiome, that vast ecosystem of microorganisms living in us and on us. And importantly, they aren't just in the gut, they're apparently in all organ systems.
Which is such a huge departure from the historical medical focus, which was all about sterilization, killing microbes.
Absolutely, total opposite. The sources even get into the virome, the trillions of viruses in our bodies, framing them not just as pathogens, but potentially as a genetic communication network.
Yeah.
There's a perspective offered that our genetic code itself might have been shaped by viruses over evolutionary time, and that being constantly in opposition to them might actually mean losing some of our adaptive capacity. Tied to this, the viewpoint that vaccine approaches focusing only on antibody response, or maybe antiquated, is also mentioned.
That's a really thought-provoking angle, viruses as communicators, not just attackers. The sources also use examples like HIV and hepatitis C. They were around for a long time before becoming widespread diseases, right?
Exactly. And the suggestion made is that maybe it wasn't just the virus suddenly becoming more aggressive, but perhaps environmental changes, toxic load,
Yeah.
stress. Maybe these things broke down our innate immune system first, making us susceptible.
It definitely challenges the conventional narrative. But bringing it back to the gut specifically, the sources focus intensely on the gut lining's tight junctions.
Yes, the tight junctions. Think of them like the fine mesh screen of that internal firewall you mentioned. They're meant to regulate exactly what passes from your digestive tract into your bloodstream. Very selective.
And when that screen gets damaged, when the mesh gets holes in it, that's leaky gut.
Precisely. Weak and tight junctions allow stuff that shouldn't get through toxins, undigested food particles, microbial fragments to leak into the bloodstream. And that triggers systemic inflammation, contributing to a whole host of issues, from gut problems like IBD and Crohn's to maybe broader autoimmune conditions.
Okay, so protecting these tight junctions is critical. What's damaging this crucial firewall in the modern world, according to the sources?
Well, modern agricultural chemicals get a big mention. Herbicides, pesticides, with glyphosate being called out specifically and repeatedly.
Glyphosate, yeah.
Also, antibiotics, GMOs, and certain common foods, like gluten for susceptible individuals, are cited as major culprits in damaging these tight junctions.
And this is where a product like Ion Gut Health comes into the picture in the sources. It's from Dr. Zach Bush, described as a soil-based mineral supplement.
Yes, exactly. It's based on a specific lignite extract called terahydrite. And the sources emphasize it's not a probiotic or a prebiotic, it's different. It's described as a mineral and amino acid complex, designed to create an environment where the tight junctions can heal themselves and stay protected, even from things like glyphosate exposure. Research is mentioned showing related compounds can nullify glyphosate's negative effects on these junctions in lab settings.
So it's not adding bacteria, it's helping the body's own barrier function better. And the mechanism discussed involves something called redox signaling molecules. That sounds complex.
It is a bit complex, but it's presented as crucial. Redox signaling molecules are described as this fundamental communication network that cells use for repair, for regulation, basically for talking to each other about damage and coordinating responses. Both our own cells' mitochondria and the bacteria in our microbiome, they make their own redox signaling systems.
Okay, a communication network.
And the sources make this really striking claim that a significant portion of aging, maybe at least 50%, could be due to a loss or disruption of these redox molecules over time.
Wow, 50%, that's huge. How does that loss connect back to the gut barrier, the tight junctions?
Well, they link it all together. The decline of mitochondrial function, a loss of electrical charge in cells, cellular dehydration, and compromised tight junctions. The sources suggest the loss of these redox communication molecules might underlie all these issues. They're presented almost like a liquid circuit board that can help restore cellular hydration and the integrity of those tight junctions, potentially very quickly, like within minutes in lab studies.
So supporting this redox communication network is key to fixing that firewall.
Hmm.
The sources also have a pretty stark statement about children today.
Yes, it's quite concerning. The perspective offered is that due to toxic environments, interventions like C-sections, where the baby might inherit hospital bacteria instead of the mother's vaginal microbiome and potentially inheriting damaged mitochondria from the mother. Children might be starting life already biologically burdened, almost born old is the phrase used.
That's a heavy thought, but it really emphasizes the importance of that early microbial inheritance and environment. And sometimes when people start trying to heal the gut, maybe using something like ION, they experience a healing crisis, a Herxheimer reaction.
That's mentioned as a possibility, yeah. The sources suggest symptoms, like maybe headaches, could actually be due to the brain rehydrating and membrane stretching as they heal. Or maybe it's an oxidative event where the immune system reacts strongly, but the body's antioxidant reserves are temporarily low. A key proposed aspect of how ion works is by facilitating this bacterial communication, letting the microbes play a central role in the healing process.
And this bacterial communication network, they even speculate, might help cells identify and handle things like cancer cells.
It points towards a much more sophisticated, integrated role for the microbiome than we previously understood. It's not just about digestion. The sources briefly contrast ION, presented as a carbon-based redox system from ancient soil bacteria focused on the gut barrier, with other products like EZEA, which are described as oxygen-based redox molecules derived from mitochondria. Both involve creating stable redox molecules and are said to promote proliferation of beneficial bacteria in the case of ION, and potentially mitochondria with EZEA. ION is specifically highlighted for showing zero toxicity in studies and even increasing cell lifespan in lab conditions.
Okay, so the core message from this whole gut health section is really a major shift. Don't just focus on your human cells. True health is fundamentally about supporting the diverse microbial ecosystem within you and critically maintaining the integrity of that internal firewall, the gut lining.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears slightly, but definitely staying in the realm of metabolic health. The sources bring in some really valuable insights from folks like Dr. Benjamin Bickman and Dr. Mindy Pelz, focusing on the massive issue of insulin resistance.
Yeah, and the statistic they cite is pretty alarming, isn't it? Only about 12% of Americans are considered metabolically fit. That leaves a staggering 88% with some level of metabolic health issue, even if they aren't visibly overweight.
It's truly widespread. And the primary drivers, according to these sources, no big surprise. Diet, specifically what we eat and how often we eat. Processed foods loaded with refined starches, sugars, and unhealthy fats are major culprits. Refined carbs are particularly highlighted as problematic, though they often go hand in hand with bad fats in those ultra-processed foods.
And there's that rather cynical point made in the sources that mainstream dietary advice often doesn't prioritize tackling these fundamental issues because, well, as they put it, there's no money to be made just telling people to eat simple whole foods.
It's a stark observation, certainly. Key signs of insulin resistance are also laid out pretty clearly. Things like being unable to comfortably fast for, say, 12 hours. Because chronically high insulin prevents your body from easily accessing stored fat for fuel. High blood pressure is another sign, and even infertility is mentioned as potentially linked.
They also briefly touch on the impact of antibiotics, how they can contribute to weight gain, and the complex role of the microbiome itself in metabolic health, though they acknowledge that precisely manipulating the microbiome for weight loss isn't fully figured out yet.
Definitely complex. But the clear takeaway message is that testing your insulin sensitivity is crucial. You need to know where you stand to understand your metabolic state properly. That knowledge is power.
Which naturally leads to the question of how this metabolic state intersects with exercise. Specifically, that age-old question, should you eat before you work out?
Right. The sources present both sides. There's the traditional view, consume carbs, maybe some protein beforehand for peak performance energy, fuel for the workout.
Yeah, the standard advice.
But then they offer an alternative perspective, one that might be
Yeah.
particularly relevant for the average person or someone really focused on metabolic health and longevity.
And that alternative view is?
Fasting before exercise, working out in a fasted state. The argument presented is that this maximizes beneficial processes like autophagy, that cellular cleanup we keep coming back to.
Okay.
It also helps your body become more metabolically flexible, better at burning fat for fuel, and it spares your limited glycogen stores.
So it really sounds like it depends heavily on your individual goals, doesn't it?
Exactly. The sources make it very clear it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. An elite athlete pushing for peak performance, needing progressive overload for competition, they might very well need that pre-workout fuel.
Makes sense.
But for general health, longevity, improving metabolic flexibility, especially for, say, average folks or older individuals, fasted exercise is presented as potentially highly beneficial for triggering autophagy and improving fat adaptation. Though they do add a sensible caveat. Be mindful of potential muscle catabolism, especially with intense or prolonged fasted workouts. Maybe occasional pre-workout essential amino acids could be considered depending on individual needs and goals.
Right. It's about aligning the timing of your food, or lack thereof, with your specific fitness and health objectives. Smart.
And speaking of metabolic states and fuel sources, let's talk about ketones.
Okay, ketones.
The sources explain that your body naturally produces ketones when you're in a state of carbohydrate deprivation. So following a low-carb or ketogenic diet, or during periods of fasting, it's essentially a backup fuel system, a survival mechanism to provide an alternative energy source, especially for the brain, when glucose levels are low.
Okay, so the body cleverly switches fuels, and they make a distinction between different types of ketosis, right?
Yes, that's important. They contrast endogenous ketosis. That's when your body makes the ketones itself internally because of your diet or fasting. This state is linked to broad physiological benefits like increased fat burning, metabolic improvements, cellular signaling changes.
Right, the natural way.
Exactly. And they contrast that with exogenous ketosis.
Which is using supplements, like ketone drinks or MCT oil.
Right. Using ketone supplements like ketone esters or salts or MCT oils, which are easily converted to ketones, to artificially raise your blood ketone levels. You can do this even if you haven't restricted carbs or fasted significantly.
So what's the use case for those then?
Well, they can be useful, maybe for helping someone meet their macronutrient needs on a strict keto diet, or providing a quick energy boost for sports performance, or perhaps deepening ketone levels during a fast. However, the sources sort of imply that the deeper systemic metabolic benefits, particularly things like significant fat loss, are likely more strongly tied to the underlying lifestyle changes, the diet, the fasting that induce endogenous ketosis. The supplement might provide the ketone fuel, but the profound metabolic adaptation comes from the diet and fasting itself.
Got it. So the supplement might offer some benefits, but it doesn't fully replace the effects of earning those ketones through diet or fasting. What are some of the advantages of ketones themselves that are mentioned?
They list quite a few potential advantages. Ketones readily cross the blood-brain barrier, which glucose needs help with. This provides sustained energy for the brain, supporting cognitive function and mental clarity.
So they're a great brain fuel.
Often presented that way, yes. They're also linked to improved physical endurance and faster recovery, better overall metabolic health, and potentially aiding weight management. From a longevity standpoint, the benefits are tied to supporting metabolic and cognitive health long-term, improving insulin sensitivity, reducing oxidative stress and brain inflammation, and they can even alter neurotransmitter levels in potentially beneficial ways.
These sound like a bit of a super fuel, especially for the brain.
That's definitely the angle. Specific potential benefits mentioned in the sources include things like reducing epileptic seizures, that's a well-established use, and potentially improving cognitive function and BDNF levels in conditions like Alzheimer's disease. Delta G is mentioned as one example of a specific ketone supplement discussed in the sources.
Okay. Now, one of the most, well, frankly, uplifting sections in the sources, for me anyway, was the focus on the body's incredible innate ability to regenerate. We might not regrow limbs like salamanders, sadly, but these processes of programmed cell death, apoptosis, and creating new cells regeneration, they're happening constantly, aren't they?
It's truly remarkable when you look at the numbers the sources provide. Get this. An estimated 330 billion cells are replaced in your body every single day.
330 billion daily.
Yeah.
That's astounding.
Isn't it? And over about 80 days, you've created something like 30 trillion new cells, which is roughly the total number of cells in your body. Your entire cellular mass is effectively recreated roughly every year and a half.
Wow. So you're literally, at a cellular level, a different person every year and a half or so.
To a large extent, yes. Now, turnover rates vary a lot by tissue, of course. Fast-replicating cells like blood cells and the cells lining your gut account for a huge chunk of that number. But the powerful takeaway that's really emphasized is this. Your physical state tomorrow is genuinely, tangibly being built by your actions today. Your diet, how you move, even your mindset.
That's a huge motivator, isn't it? Knowing you're constantly rebuilding. And the sources highlight specific body tissues that show significant regenerative potential that can be influenced by nutrition and lifestyle.
Yes, let's look at some of those. The brain, for instance. We used to think brain cells were fixed, but we now know neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, continues throughout life, particularly in the hippocampus, which is key for memory.
Right.
And this is supported, according to the sources, by compounds like polyphenols found in things like blueberries and green tea carnosine, quercetin, berberine, hemp seed oil, and vitamin D, which is also linked to remyelination. Interestingly, they note that statin drugs might actually inhibit myelin formation, the insulation around nerves. Some compounds supporting spinal cord potential are also mentioned.
So you can grow new brain cells, and what you eat and do supports this. Amazing. How about the liver? That's known for regeneration.
The liver is pretty unique, yeah. It can actually regenerate back to its full original size, mainly using its own mature liver cells, not just relying on stem cells. The sources highlight compounds that support this process. Curcumin is mentioned for repair and regeneration. Coffee apparently stimulates it. Carvacrol from oregano. Korean ginseng, rooibos tea, and omega-3 fats, which also help reduce scarring or fibrosis during healing.
That's incredible resilience. Okay, what about the beta cells in the pancreas? These make insulin, so they're crucial for diabetes.
Yeah, there's some really exciting potential discussed here for regeneration or improved survival of beta cells, which could be game-changing for conditions like type 1 diabetes. Gymnema sylvestre is noted for stimulating insulin release and increasing beta cell number in some studies. GABA is mentioned as being protective and potentially regenerative, maybe even reversing diabetes in animal models. Black cumin showed partial regeneration in studies. And then there's a whole list: vitamin D, arginine, avocado seed extract, bitter melon, chard extract, corn silk, sulforaphane from broccoli sprouts, berberine, capsaicin. Even interval exercise training is linked to beta cell health.
Wow, a lot of potential avenues there for helping the body heal the very cells needed to manage blood sugar. And the heart,
Indeed.
can heart muscle regenerate?
We used to think not so much. But the sources indicate that heart muscle cells are continually replaced, albeit slowly, by resident cardiac stem cells. Resveratrol is specifically noted for activating autophagy in heart cells, activating these stem cells, and improving regeneration after a heart attack in studies. Coffee is also suggested to be protective and encourage repair, and certain extracts, like from wheat germ and echinacea, are mentioned for potentially mobilizing these stem cells and helping them home to the damaged area.
Okay. What about connective tissues like cartilage that's notoriously slow to heal?
It definitely has limited self-repair capacity, that's true, but the sources suggest it still has some regenerative potential. This is supported by compounds like glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate, which are thought to help reduce degradation, and also vitamin C, which is essential for collagen synthesis.
And bone, that seems to remodel pretty constantly.
Bone has significant regenerative potential, absolutely. The sources mention support from things like noni leaves, black tea extracts, lactoferrin, a protein in milk, natto, fermented soybeans, which boosts vitamin K2 needed for the bone protein, osteocalcin, and omega-3 fats again. Diet overall is stressed as being hugely significant for bone health and regeneration.
Makes sense. Finally, the skin. That obviously regenerates quickly, but can it regenerate more completely, like without scarring?
Well, the sources point to studies showing potential for more complete scarless regeneration, drawing parallels with fetal healing or looking at some examples of adult appendage regeneration in other species. Specific compounds mentioned for supporting skin repair and regeneration include apocinin from Picrohiza coroa, folic acid, and even creatine, which might accelerate epidermal regeneration.
It's just incredible to think about this constant renewal happening. And beyond specific nutrients, what else from the sources supports this whole regeneration idea?
Lifestyle is absolutely key, reinforcing that holistic view. Physical exercise is vital. It provides signals for cellular turnover and repair. Mental exercise, things like brain training games, meditation is linked to better brain function and potentially nerve repair, and even engaging hobbies. Things like knitting, quilting, playing a musical instrument, activities that engage fine motor skills or deep concentration are mentioned as positively affecting brain function and potentially nerve repair pathways.
It really brings it all together: mind, body, nutrition. Okay, here's a concept from the sources that felt almost counterintuitive at first. It comes from James McWilliams: xenohormesis.
Ah, yes, xenohormesis. It is a fascinating idea, isn't it? It's the concept that plants grown under a certain amount of ecological stress, think mild drought, slightly salty soil, maybe pest pressure,
Yeah.
actually produce unique beneficial compounds, these extra nutritional constituents.
Right.
And when animals, including us, eat these stressed plants, we effectively piggyback on the plant's sophisticated stress response systems and gain survival or health advantages from those compounds.
So wait, a plant that's had a bit of a tough life might actually be more nutritious, or at least beneficial in a different way, for the animal that eats it. That sounds totally backwards.
It does, initially. But the evolutionary argument presented makes sense. The idea is that plants that had to work harder to survive in difficult conditions often adapted by absorbing more unique nutrients from the soil or by developing stronger chemical defenses, these beneficial secondary metabolites.
Okay.
Animals that consistently consumed these hardier stressed plants gained access to these potent compounds, which in turn helped them thrive, maybe live longer, be more resilient. It's presented as a form of coevolution and, in a way, mutualism.
That puts a whole new spin on tough love for plants. Are there examples of plants known to do this?
The sources mention several. Plants like cucumbers, mustard seeds, grapes, think resveratrol and stress grapes, lettuce, soybeans, black currants, chokeberries. These are all given as examples of plants capable of producing higher yields of certain therapeutic compounds when they experience a bit of environmental stress.
And the implication for how we practice agriculture today? That's pretty significant, right? If we're focused on maximizing yield and minimizing stress.
Absolutely, it raises a really important question. By pampering our crops, giving them ideal, stress-free conditions with perfect irrigation, fertilizers, pesticides, are we inadvertently making them less nutritionally dense from this specific xenohormetic perspective?
Hmm.
The sources suggest that human agriculture, being relatively very young on an evolutionary timescale, might actually be quite poor at optimizing food for these complex, beneficial plant-animal interactions compared to how things worked in natural ecosystems over millennia. Xenohormesis kind of demands a certain humility about our ability to fully replicate nature's intricate sophistication in producing truly optimal food.
That's a really profound thought that trying to make things easier for our food plants might actually be making our food less potent in some ways.
Okay, let's bring this all back home to measuring how we're actually aging. Let's revisit the concept of biological age or bioage. Right, bioage. This is distinct from your chronological age, the number of candles on your birthday cake. The sources really emphasize that your biological age is measurable, and crucially, it seems to be influenceable.
Okay, so you could be chronologically 50, but have the underlying biology, the bioage of someone closer to 40, or sadly, maybe closer to 60. How do we measure this bioage then, according to the sources? What's the leading tech?
The leading technology presented by far really is DNA methylation analysis. This is often referred to as the epigenetic clock, or sometimes the methylation clock or the Horvath clock after one of the pioneers.
Okay, DNA methylation, what exactly is that?
Think of it like this. Your DNA is your underlying genetic code, the book of life, right? Methylation involves attaching tiny chemical tags, methyl groups, onto the DNA molecule itself. These tags don't change the actual letters in the book, the DNA sequence, but they act like little sticky notes or bookmarks. They function like on-off switches, silencing certain genes or making others more active. This pattern of tags effectively determines what a cell does and when it does it, whether it's a skin cell, a liver cell, etc.
Got it. So it's controlling gene expression. And the pattern of these tags changes as we age.
Exactly. The specific pattern of where these methyl tags are placed across your genome changes in a predictable way over time. And importantly, this pattern is strongly linked to the aging process and the onset of chronic diseases. The sources highlight that people who look and feel younger than their years, who are functionally healthier, often have DNA methylation patterns that align with a younger chronological age.
So your biological age, as measured by this epigenetic clock, seems to really reflect your true underlying health state. That's powerful. So the big question, how can we influence these methylation patterns? Can we actually make our biological age younger?
Well, that's the exciting part. Several strategies come out clearly from the sources. Diet is presented as absolutely crucial. It's twofold. First, you need to consume foods rich in the building blocks for these tags, the methyl group donors, things like folate from leafy greens, choline, eggs, liver, and betaine, beets, spinach.
Okay, the raw materials.
Right. But also you need methylation adaptogens. These are often phytonutrients from plants that help the enzymes involved in putting those methyl tags on and taking them off your DNA function properly. They help regulate the whole process.
Are there specific foods mentioned, like supercharged methylation foods?
Yes, the sources provide a great list. Things like dark leafy greens, spinach, kale, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, liver. They specifically recommend organic, grass-fed if possible. Beets, beans and legumes, okra, mushrooms, seeds like sesame and sunflower, and spices like turmeric and rosemary plus berries. These are all packed with either donors or adaptogens or both.
That's a good list to focus on.
And they reference Dr. Cara Fitzgerald's study, which reportedly showed a measurable reversal of biological aging, making people biologically younger, according to these clocks, using a specific diet rich in these foods, combined with lifestyle interventions.
Wow, actually reversing biological age with diet and lifestyle in a study?
Yeah.
That's pretty groundbreaking. What else besides diet?
Exercise is key again, no surprise there. Specifically, the sources note that combining resistance training, lifting weights, with endurance training, cardio, seems to positively influence DNA methylation patterns.
Okay, a mix of both.
Ensuring you have sufficient methyl group donors, perhaps through targeted supplements if your diet is lacking, is also mentioned as a supportive strategy.
And given the strong link between stress and aging we talked about earlier, I'm guessing stress management is important here too.
Absolutely. Practices like meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, other stress reduction techniques. These are linked in studies to slower rates of biological aging as measured by these methylation clocks.
Makes sense. And is there anything we should actively avoid for good methylation health?
Yes. One thing is strongly highlighted. Limiting unsaturated fats, specifically the omega-6 fatty acid called linoleic acid, LA. This is found heavily in many common vegetable and seed oils, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, etc.
Ah, the industrial seed oils.
Exactly. They're called out as potentially harmful because they can cause significant oxidative stress.
Mhm.
And worse, this LA can get incorporated into your cell membranes and potentially stay there for years, negatively impacting cellular function, including the delicate balance of methylation.
So ditching those processed seed oils seems like a good move. The sources also mention a specific commercial testing service for this.
They do. They introduced True Diagnostic, founded by Ryan Smith. They offer commercial DNA methylation testing, analyzing, they say, over 900,000 locations across your genome. Using published algorithms based on scientific research, they provide not just an overall bioage estimate, but potentially other health insights derived from those methylation patterns. Things like estimating your past exposure to certain heavy metals or plastics, and even calculating your telomere length from the same sample. They position this platform as potentially changing diagnostic approaches in the future.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned telomere length. How do these methylation clocks compare to just measuring telomeres for assessing aging? That used to be the main focus.
Yeah, that comparison is made directly in the sources. While telomere length is a biomarker of aging, and shorter telomeres are generally associated with older age and disease, DNA methylation is presented as being significantly more strongly correlated to the aging process itself, and much more predictive of health outcomes and mortality.
More predictive.
Apparently so. A twin study is referenced, for example, showing that methylation clocks accounted for something like 35% of the variance in aging between individuals, whereas telomere length only accounted for about 2%. So while telomere length is a separate important process and biomarker, methylation appears to capture a much larger part of the overall aging picture, according to these sources.
Wow, 35% versus 2%. That's a really big difference in predictive power. Finally, there was that really intriguing, almost weird finding mentioned from True Diagnostics' COVID study.
Yes, that was quite surprising. So that study found, maybe unsurprisingly, that COVID exposure was associated with shortened telomere length. Okay?
Uh,
But the really unexpected part was how the biological aging response, measured by methylation, differed dramatically by age.
How so?
For people over 50, even having just mild or moderate COVID seemed to accelerate their biological aging clock. They aged faster epigenetically.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. Illness stressing the system.
Right. But here's the twist. For those under 50, the study data suggested the opposite, an apparent anti-aging effect on their methylation patterns after COVID exposure.
Wait, an anti-aging effect? From COVID, that seems completely counterintuitive.
It absolutely is. It's presented as a complex finding emerging from their large dataset, possibly reflecting age-dependent differences in immune responses or cellular stress responses that influence epigenetic programming in unexpected ways. Definitely a point to chew on and something that likely needs more research to fully understand. So, wow, we've really taken a deep dive into this comprehensive stack of sources you provided on longevity and aging. A lot to cover.
We really did. We went right from the fundamentals, didn't we? The
Yeah.
cellular hallmarks, those key pathways like sirtuins, MTOR, AMPK, and then exploring how things like specific exercise types like HIIT, calorie restriction, fasting techniques, and targeted supplements might influence them.
Yeah, and we looked at strategies specifically aimed at invigorating mitochondria, including that detailed three-phase fast-track-fast protocol, focusing on NAD plus loading, clearing out those senescent zombie cells, and then promoting renewal.
And we uncovered those surprising, really multifaceted roles of melatonin way beyond just sleep, right? Its
Yeah.
impact on immunity, the gut microbiome swarming, even potentially helping with heavy metal detoxification.
Absolutely. Then we discussed geranyl, GG, as that crucial building block that declines with age, and how it affects to making vital compounds like CoQ10 and vitamin K and the statin connection there.
And that whole major paradigm shift around the microbiome, viewing it as truly central to our health, understanding the gut lining as that critical firewall, how it gets damaged by modern life, things like glyphosate, and how interventions like ION might support its integrity through redox signaling.
Right. We tackled the huge issue of insulin resistance, looked at its driver's diet, processed foods, the signs to watch for, and those different perspectives on timing exercise around food intake, thinking about metabolic health and autophagy.
Then we explored ketones, the difference between making them yourself endogenously versus taking them exogenously, and all their varied potential benefits for the brain and body, energy, metabolism.
And we highlighted the body's just amazing regenerative capacity, looking at how specific tissues, brain, liver, beta cells, heart, cartilage, bone, skin, have this constant potential for repair and renewal, and how nutrition and lifestyle directly support that.
We even touched on that quirky concept of xenohormesis, the idea that eating plants that have faced a little bit of stress might actually give us unique benefits.
Yeah. And finally, we really got into the science of measuring biological age, using DNA methylation, how it works, why it seems more predictive than just chronological age or even telomere length, and most importantly, the specific diet, exercise, supplement, and stress strategies presented in these sources for potentially turning back that biological clock.
You know, what really comes through powerfully from synthesizing all these different sources is that aging. It's not presented as this fixed, inevitable decline that's just written in stone.
Not at all. It's presented much more as a dynamic, incredibly complex process that's deeply influenced by a multitude of factors. And the exciting part is many of those factors seem to be within our power to influence, using scientifically supported strategies involving diet, lifestyle, targeted interventions.
It really ties everything together, doesn't it? From the trillions of microbes living inside you to the specific molecules in the plants you eat, the stress signals your body receives. It highlights this incredible interconnectedness of it all.
Indeed. It's just a powerful reminder, really, of how incredibly responsive our biology is to the environment we create for it, both the environment inside our bodies and the one outside.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, drawing on all this. This dynamism, this regenerative capacity, this interconnectedness we've discussed, given how dynamic and responsive our bodies truly are, constantly replacing billions of cells, influenced by everything from our microbes to our food to our thoughts, what does this really mean for how we should think about health and disease? Maybe not just as fixing broken parts when something goes wrong, but perhaps more profoundly, as actively fostering an environment that supports continuous repair, regeneration, and adaptation throughout our lives. Something to really mull on.